The great fish moved silently through the night water, propelled by short sweeps of its crescent tail. There was little other motion.
I think so much has happened in my life to bring me back here, where it really all started with my career and growth on YouTube. Thalassophobia as a word, a phobia, even a concept has become inherently an important part of my platform on this site and even affected the way that I continue to make videos. The ocean is for many, including myself, a place of imaginable horror, anxieties, a darkness, a void of wetness, suffocating realm that holds the monsters in the darkest corners of our mind. Just a foot into a bottomless pool of water induces a feeling of something reaching out from those depths and grabbing my foot to take me down. Or looking above the waves and then just to have a second looking under that wet sheet of the ocean to be met with the eyes of something unknown. This is a feeling of true terror. There is a deep-seated fear and phobia I've explored on this channel before. This is thalassophobia. But for those catching up or who may even need a reminder, what is this phobia and why is it so prevalent? Why is it so feared and almost admired as a fear in its own right? The fear of the unknown depths and what it may hold and what we have been told lingers in the bottom of that ocean. Cthulhu, Megalodon, Krakens, Leviathans, every single horrific creation we've been told that exists down there is waiting down there for us to enter their worlds. I've always admired how developers are able to transfer things that we know so well in the real world and put them in video games, and when it comes to this phobia, it's maybe one of the few that almost is translated perfectly. And because of that reason alone, this topic is one that really piques my interest. The translation of real phobias emulated in video games that we played, with all of the above that you're seeing now that I've covered so passionately. But thalassophobia for me is the king of phobias. A vast ocean, pools of water in a video game could immediately send anyone who suffers with this phobia into a spiral. Tomb Raider, Fallout, games that aren't inherently horror by nature bring out a primal and unexplainable feeling of dread each time we are faced with the reality of those depths. But today I don't want to cover the empty void, I want to talk about something that may be very relevant to the ocean and talking about the fear of it. Galleophobia, the fear of sharks. Sure, very similar to submechophobia, hydrophobia, even megalothalassophobia. This is just another neat file that fits perfectly in this folder known as thalassophobia. Sharks are very real and very scary in reality of those who fear the ocean, and understandably so. From the Mako's ability to be able to swim over 45 miles an hour, the goblin shark's fucked faces, bull shark's abilities to hunt in any waters, and of course, the great white shark. The great white is one of the most feared, admired, and even inspiring predator that we know on Earth, with the possibility of growing over 20 feet long, teeth that can crack boats, muscles that can send divers' cages crashing to the bottom of the ocean. The great white shark is a real terror, a real horror, and should be feared. And that's what we're told and made to believe, and that's just not true. And you know it. Let's talk Jaws, both the Spielberg movie and of course the Peter Benchley book. Jaws is iconic. It's one of those films that I watch yearly. I love Jaws and it inspires me to be a better creator every time I watch it. The characters, casting, acting, the level of degree in directing, the way the film came together despite being a disaster, and most importantly, the titular character, Bruce, the shark. Interestingly enough, the book and the film were released a year apart, but with Benchley and Spielberg working together to work on the screenplay. Of course, a lot was cut and changed with the characters, but one thing stayed that was very clear from day one: sharks are bad.
The fish was about 40 feet away from the woman, off to the side, when it turned suddenly to the left, dropped entirely below the surface, and with 2 quick thrusts of its tail was upon her. At first, the woman thought she'd snagged her leg on a rock or a piece of floating wood. There was no initial pain, only one violent tug on her right leg. She reached down to touch her foot, treading water with her left leg to keep her head up feeling in the blackness with her left hand. She could not find her foot. Her groping fingers had found a nub of bone and tattered flesh. She knew that the warm, pulsing flow over her fingers in the chill water was her own blood.
This is from the opening chapter of the book, and the first thing you are told is this thing lingers out there and waits for its opportunity, waits for you to enter the water. Benchley's book is an exploration of age, masculinity, femininity, capitalism, greed, and ultimately overcoming impossible odds. The book is pretty simple and compelling for one reason. Brody is given a single task and must deal with it. If there's a shark in these waters, how does he overcome this issue? But he is then met by a greedy mayor who is in deep with the mob and can't close the beaches because he ultimately needs the money that these waters bring during the 4th of July celebrations. That's why it's so engaging to listen and even watch this film, because there are two real major threats that come in play here. One that is a monster and the other that is man. And unfortunately, Brody doesn't have the experience to be able to do this alone. Brody clearly states that he doesn't care much for the water, being from the big city, therefore he's never had any reason to understand it. So of course he's going to need to bring in some help with a professional by the name of Matt Hooper. Matt Hooper is a young rich ichthyologist who has an interest and passion for sharks and is the perfect man he needs for this kind of job. And this is where the book and films really do separate, as Matt feels completely different in both. In the film, he's the most likable character out of the lot, and he's the audience's sarcasm to the situation, grounding and almost showing a passionate side to the ocean and what it has to offer. But while in the book, Matt is almost posed as the villain. He's the opposite of Brody. He almost has everything Brody wants: the look, the money, the intelligence, and the book often makes Brody feel small and emasculated against Matt, to the stage that further in the book, Ellen, Brody's wife, who is currently going through a midlife crisis, feels that she's becoming too old and ugly, and this eventually spurs into a date and an eventual fling with Matt behind Brody's back. A fact that Brody is almost certainly aware of as well, and is haunted and taunted by Matt's presence, ability and youth and even success throughout the final chapters of the book itself. Eventually, Matt and Brody need to inquire into further help, and that's from Quint. Quint is a fisherman and a hunter, a man who's willing to do whatever it takes to bring down his prey. Quint knows the same and maybe a little more on hunting sharks than Matt can ever do, but that's because of the lengths he's willing to go. He comes across as an unhinged man who's willing to get his hands dirty, a man who's willing to finally do the job, someone who's moulded and prepared in a very same way that Brody is, and despite Quint often coming across pretty untrustworthy, he opens a venue of abuse towards the shark and Matt in ways that is almost celebrated and admired through the eyes of Brody. These three are in constant conflict in the final chapters of the book amongst themselves, and also of course with the shark itself. Matt Hooper's love and passion for the shark is pretty understated though, and Quint is always talking about using bait, to the stage that he will illegally kill dolphins, take the unborn baby dolphins and use them as bait themselves, which is an entirely illegal, unethical and totally disgusting way to draw out your prey. And of course Hooper takes note of this, while Brody still doesn't really understand the lengths of how sick this is as an act. Matt only wants to preserve, understand and watch the shark, and this is actually painted as a weakness in the book. Maybe because Benchley almost vilified him as a person, but this is just the unfortunate issue when you have characters like Brody who by the book's standards aren't very open to new ideas. So having to understand and keep the shark alive means very little to Brody, Quint, the mayor and most importantly the reader. The shark is the monster, the big bad threat, the thing that needs to be feared and killed.
Well, you son of a...
Jaws is believed to be inspired or at least scarily similar to the 1960 Jersey Shore attacks, where 4 people were unfortunately killed by presumably one female great white shark, which was said to be oddly aggressive, lurking around and almost had the taste for man and kept coming back for more when the opportunity arrived. And within 2 weeks a shark was found and killed by hunter Michael Schleiser, and of course then the killings stopped. But there has been a reason to believe that this maybe was a misunderstanding. understanding. Now, of course, there is a lot of evidence that the great white may have not been the one that actually killed these people. And the shark that was killed and captured may have even been misidentified as a bull shark, or maybe even a group of them that were on migration at the time. Whites are of course opportunistic hunters and scare very easily despite their size. They famously fear and don't like humans, and if they are spotted or even made eye contact with their prey, will choose a different time to eventually hunt them. But throughout history and the lingering effect of the Jersey Shore attacks and Jaws, the great white is the bigger and unfortunately cooler beast that people needed to forever paint as pure evil. And there is an incredible line in Jaws from the mayor that beautifully sums up people's relationships with sharks as a whole.
Martin, it's all psychological. You yell barracuda. Everybody says, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
It's simple, but he isn't wrong. Benchley in his later years, all the way to his death in 2006, actively apologised and even regrets even writing the book in the first place, taking back all he had put on paper and screen, and of course feels guilty for making people believe all sharks like Jaws are cold-blooded killers wanting to hunt every single person who lingers in the ocean. Not solely, but ultimately sharks paid that ultimate price with their lives and reputation. Sure, shark attacks can happen and will happen, but it's very rare. In 2022 alone, there were 57 shark attacks in the whole year. 98% of them are sharks being curious, as they're curious creatures, wondering who and what we are, and what we possibly taste like. In recent years, it definitely feels like this general stigma of sharks is beginning to change, as information is way more easy to spread these days, but nonetheless, this doesn't change how they're still being treated and not preserved by humanity. Hundreds of thousands of different breeds of sharks are hunted and killed by humans across the world for their fins and oils, and just for the goal of killing a shark. Because many of us still lack the general respect and understanding that is needed to deal with these uniquely beautiful creatures. Over the last 50 years, there's been a 71% decrease in global oceanic shark life, and the likes of the great hammerhead shark and whitetip are in critical endangered positions and could be eradicated within the next 15 years. There's a lot of misinformation spread about sharks, and of course you can understand why Peter Benchley felt so guilty for the book he had written. Benchley did all he could while he was alive to try and deplete this stigma, but unfortunately the monster was set in stone. Jason Voorhees is a fictional monster that will hunt you while you're going camping, but sharks were real. The xenomorph was an alien in outer space, a fake monster millions of miles away, but the shark was on your planet. The fictional spirit of the Ring could climb out of your TV at any time, but the shark really does linger in our depths. That is all that was needed for a foundation of shark movies to be made over and over again, and sometimes they actually got creative, like in Deep Blue Sea, which used a mako shark instead of course the often great white sharks. But ultimately, nonetheless, the great white shark is the T-Rex of the ocean, and that sells tickets. And now I have no problem with a good shark movie, because sure, playing on fears is fun, and of course there is a genuine real fear that can happen and will happen with people with sharks, and of course sharks are actually known to kill people from time to time. But almost every single shark movie back to back sells them on being nothing but pure hatred and just man-eaters out thriving for human blood, when you know very much that's not the truth or the fact, and movies aren't going to tell you otherwise. We can't deny that they are one hell of a predator, that perfect machine for killing. With a reputation that is paired with thalassophobia, you're gonna have yourself one hell of a nightmare for many, and that could be surely explored into so many other media.
Chris, stop! No!
Before the break, we took a look at the bad reputation that sharks have, but nonetheless we assessed that they are a true predatorial force of nature that needs to be loved and respected, but unfortunately due to the wickedness of man, they clearly aren't. And now the big question is, what kind of nightmarish fuel can they bring outside of the oceans and into our TV screens? This brings me on to the main topic of this video. In the original Thalassophobia video, I failed to look at the relationship between video games and the ocean. As in more recent years, we have seen games become so big that it's nearly become inherently impossible to avoid what happens when you clash huge land masses surrounded by an entirely growing ocean. But the fear of thalassophobia in video games has always been there and has always lingered, dating back to the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog's horrifying drowning music, which is just so anxiety inducing overall, and of course you can't forget Echo the Dolphin's Vortex Queen, a giant sea monster that lurks within the depths with its head poking out just a little bit and only giving the player a glimpse of what this thing really is, and surely and definitely has done a lot of damage to people who suffer with thalassophobia. But I find that it's more in the 3D era of gaming where devs were faced with a tricky question. How do we stop our players from leaving our sandboxes? During the PlayStation 1 and 64 era, there was a new breed of water levels being invented thanks to the brand new 3D worlds which video games were now able to be rendered as. And with these new water levels and 3D worlds, there have to be a new breed of threats as well that the player could face. With Mario 64 huge disturbing eel that lies in the bottom of a shipwreck, and being able to freely swim around in a huge open space that also have sharks that are able to swim just as freely as the player. Mario 64 set the table for movement in a 3D world, but when it comes to sharks and underwater threats, I think Banjo-Kazooie definitely takes the shark cake for sure in the 64 era. Now of course I could instantly point a finger once again at Clanker the Shark, a blend of sub-mechaphobia and galleophobia in a huge nightmare-inducing metal shark with huge off-putting eyes that will watch the player swim around in his pool. But for this video specifically, I want to talk about the mission Treasure Trove Cove, which comes along with a cute piratey vibe. This map has you running around a pirate island filled with aquatic life, with the likes of crabs, clams and even mines in pools of water, but it's the huge surrounding ocean which tempts the player. The player is able to freely jump into this water, of course being stopped by an invisible wall before going too far. But rare to stop the player from hanging out in the water for too long, put this little fucker in there. It's that music that makes you feel like you're being followed, hunted, watched, and ultimately you've become a target for the predator that lies underneath. It's that music that's clearly influenced by the Jaws soundtrack, and that's why I want to make this video. I want to take a look at the influence of Jaws and what it still has done to sharks many years later, and why are game developers still using techniques that people drew from during the 70s in video games to scare us with lies being told about these sharks. There is a common occurrence that's coming up now as games only get bigger and bigger and more free for players to explore. There is an ocean that's always there, waiting for you, always waiting for you to jump in and see how far out you can go, and it's now down for developers to choose how they fill, use, or totally ignore that setting. The what you do with the ocean dilemma is one that devs all have to overcome, and sometimes they aren't handled in the best way. One of the earliest memories I had of looking at an ocean in a video game and wanting to see what was at the bottom of it was of course during the Silent Cartographer mission in Halo Combat Evolved. Taking place on a small island surrounded of course by the ocean, the player was given the freedom to take on this island and take out the Covenant in any direction that they pleased. But Bungie unfortunately didn't also foresee people wanting to turn around and see what those waters had to offer. All you had to do was jump in a warthog or even simply just keep walking until you're met with an unfortunate invisible wall. Devs needed to find a way to 1. Stop the player from leaving the world, and 2. Make the oceans boring enough to make the player turn around and get back into the action. So how do you stop players from jumping into the ocean and escaping your world? Well, for a while, Rockstar had the right idea. During this period of game development, drowning in waters worked out for so many due to tech limitations, and most players didn't even ask questions. And this worked for the likes of Wind Waker, GTA, Crash Bandicoot, Spider-Man, GTA again, Red Dead Redemption, Rockstar, what the fuck is going on? Stop drowning your characters. Making characters die with a touch of water or after a short grace period was the best solution to stop players from diving into these poor waters and having them to be filled with something they're worth diving into. And even now we see this this as a modern solution to keep people's feet on the ground, and it's just a simple question of whether or not a developer wants a player to ignore the water or not. I remember the point when open world games really started finding its feet, and the question wasn't whether or not I could jump into the water, but how far out could I go. Some games very early on, of course, even played with the ocean. I remember jumping in the water back in Jak and Daxter and then being met with... And so with that as a memory for so many people, that changed a lot of people's views on how the ocean is handled in video games. The new big question now wasn't about jumping in, but how far can I go until something stops me or eats me? It was rare once upon a time to even see a shark in a video game, because why would you go for an effort of including something when you could just put up an invisible wall? And even as late as the mid-early 2000s, we saw invisible walls constantly being used in video games. But developers knew that people wanted something exciting, and so sharks became a new barrier for so many. Sharks in video games aren't a brand new idea. As mentioned, Banjo-Kazooie, Mario, Tomb Raider 2, sharks have had a legacy of being villains in video games since the very beginning, with the likes of the confusing name Shark Jaws, an unofficial Jaws game from 1978 where you play as a diver trying to escape the shark itself. Hell, even in Jaws the movie, the arcade Jaws game Killer Shark from 1972 makes an appearance as a light gun shooter arcade machine being played by children, being told that they have to fend off sharks that lurk in the waters. 1978 Sea Hunt saw you playing as a diver surviving in the ocean against waves of many sea animals, including sharks. There isn't a new theme here, sharks have always been the villains, it's just finding the right time to use them. Very much like Jaws and the early mass opinion on sharks alone, sharks want you dead, and society saw it as a reward to kill, to stop, to hunt all of these monsters, and painting that picture in video games of course gave people the wrong idea. Sharks in video games are interesting because they do add a new layer of fear in the games themselves, allowing the depths of the oceans and the waters and its borders to become a real threat to the player, with pure intention to have them turn around. Much like ghosts, zombies, goombas, demons, sharks throughout history have been vilified easily into the medium of gaming, but unlike anything from the ladder, sharks are very real, and it's this distinction that has a long-lasting effect on these beautiful and mostly peaceful predators that want nothing to do with us, but it doesn't stop us from knocking at their doors for no reason. Films, book, and now gaming all had that same similar effect that Jaws had to say about the shark itself. They all showed a very serious lack of understanding and even respect for these creatures, and I want to talk about its overall effect that it had on me as someone with thalassophobia, and maybe it's the core reason why I have thalassophobia in the first place. I think sharks are remarkable and beautiful by nature, but I have been nurtured in a world which keeps reminding me that these sharks are nothing more than monsters in our waters, and it's scarred me forever. In reality, in my mind, and of course in video games. Years has been a rich history of sharks in video games since its early beginnings, and developers have changed and adapted with its ever-changing worlds that we're able to now render out for everyone to explore. But despite technology evolving, the opinion on sharks in video games isn't. In Crysis 1, you play as an advanced nano-suited super soldier trapped on an island, which is very open-ended to every type of possibilities, with its visuals and sandbox looking unlike anything seen in the 2007s, being able to freely explore this island with no limitations, no matter whether you do it on foot, in a car, and of course on a boat. The player could use boats in the ocean as a tactical advantage to take on enemies, and of course this also gave the opportunity for people to turn around and leave the island. With Crysis being big, the player was actually able to get pretty far out before there was a drop-off point. When you go past this barrier, there will be a point where the game will now greet you with a great white shark, which can kill the player instantly with a single bite. It's terrifying in its speed, in its size, and just the way it moves and looks and hunts for the player. Being in this shark's zone, it will make you a hostile target immediately for it to attack, and all you could do is wait for your time for it to eventually get you. The Crysis shark by far is probably one of the most famous examples of using a shark to stop the player from exploring, and of course you can see why. And looking at Crysis' cousin franchise Far Cry, you can see why it's no stranger to the depths. Ubisoft, I feel personally for years, have been on top of their game when it comes to using the ocean as an element for players to explore, and Far Cry has been no exception from this since the start, but it was Far Cry 3 where we saw the oceans be perfected and being able to be used as a way for the player to progress. Far Cry 3 introduced of course the bull shark to the franchise, and Far Cry actually gets away from using the great white, and with good reason. The great white shark actually was originally in Far Cry 3 and it actually had a full model that was going to be used, but was ultimately cut due to the survival guide stating that it doesn't really like the taste of humans. So this would be a completely jarring and opposite reaction to having a shark that would be permanently aggressive towards the main character. But the bull shark is way easier to handle and use as an excuse in video games because bull sharks actually have salt glands which allow them to swim in any type of water for long periods of time, and that's why the bull shark is one of the most dangerous to man. In reality, there are so many accidents where bull sharks end up killing people in river water because people don't expect them to be there and they're just curious but yet aggressive creatures doing what it takes to survive in any type of water. The bull shark is one of the most dangerous to humans because of this reason, alongside with the tiger shark. But despite all that, it's the great white shark which is the one that is well known because, as I mentioned, it really is the T-Rex of the ocean. And this is why Far Cry frequently uses the bull shark instead of the huge iconic whites. And I respect Ubisoft for going in a totally different direction instead of using an aggressive great white shark trope. But nonetheless, the sharks in Far Cry will always be aggressive, and if you try escape borders, as you can see here, they will spawn one out of thin air just to track you down and stop you from leaving. It's rare to see games use the bull shark, but of course the great white is the most iconic trope and it's understandable and it's not easy just to let go of. With games like The Forest and its sequels Sons of the Forest, Raft and even Stranded Deep, the great white remains the king of the water. The Sons of the Forest actually lacks in sharks as it's more of a focus on mutants, but End Night games do a good focus of giving us a frightening presence of the shark as you're stuck in this location being surrounded by the ocean, and even at one point they throw one in a cave. That sucks. What are you doing? One of the first objective End Nights gives you to remind you that the sharks are out there just in case you have any idea of leaving is to swim out to a dinghy in the middle of the ocean, and as you could guess, is being guarded by sharks. Guarded is a strong word because I feel the forest actually does a very good job of making the sharks feel like part of nature themselves, and them stumbling onto you is more of a happy accident. And as you look out to the oceans, you will often see the great whites hunting their prey on their own terms, and it's actually very cool visually to see the great white do what it does best with its individual technique of breaching through the water. No other game can I think of actually has this technique in the game itself, at least looking out from an outside point of view and without it being used to just be a way to kill the player. While on the other end you have games like Raft and Stranded Deep, which have one goal and one goal only for sharks. Make them look like complete assholes. In Raft, you must survive on the resources that the ocean gives you, and I'm sure there is a message here about microplastics and human wastes in the ocean environments, but there is a bigger threat in these waters and that is ever present, and that is Bruce, the shark. Named, of course, and even inspired by Jaws, and the shark here, outside of a few bosses, is the only one that lurks within these waters, and because of that he feels like a single entity, a single fucking annoyance. Raft gets away from the realism aesthetics of the world, and all the characters, the style and the environments all very cartoony, and the shark here is really no different, and because of that it takes away from the horror of the ocean and instead makes him a lot more charming but way more annoying, and is possibly one of the most annoying sharks I've ever seen in a video game. But it's Bruce's personality and his mission that makes him more of a presence than any other shark that I've seen. He is able to rip away and tear apart planks of your raft in seconds, getting rid of hours of work in a single attack, and it's down to the player to deter him and get him away, and of course upgrade the raft. But every time you beat him and kill him, another shark takes his place, and just reminding us that this ocean is full of arsehole sharks. And while we're on the subject of arsehole sharks, Stranded Deep is full of them. Arseholes, that is. And sharks. I mean, technically sharks have arseholes, so I guess as many arseholes as there is a shark. Stranded Deep offers a very similar experience to Raft, just way more realistic and way harder. You're forced once again to live off the land and the ocean, and I spoke about my experience with this game last time I did a Thalassophobia video, so feel free to go back and check that out. But the sharks there weren't really the main focus. This time around though, let's talk about those little fuckers. Stranded Deep does something very interesting with a huge selection collection of sharks and other aquatic lives. They have so many sharks here that they can split it down into 2 lists: passive and aggressive. On the passive side of sharks, you have the blacktip reef shark, grey nurse shark, whale shark and marlin, while on the aggressive side you have tiger shark, hammerhead shark, goblin sharks, great white sharks, and of course a megalodon, just for some fun. Something that I admire about Stranded Deep's ocean is that it feels very alive. All types of fish, eels, snakes occupying and surrounding the shores, living out their own lives, having their own routines, all available for you to hunt, and also all available for sharks to hunt as well, to make the world feel more natural. But it's down to the player to build up the confidence and get across island to island to get to the resources that they need to escape this nightmare, and that's where that inspiration of Jaws really feels like an integral part of the gameplay here. As you make your way across these terrifyingly deep oceans, you begin to feel like you're being hunted, and that's because you hear this music. And very much like Jaws, it's an unsettling tone, it's an unsettling motif that you will hear just before you are dead. The sharks have a very interesting AI, as not all of them will attack instantly, and some of them will just lurk around the player and swim away. They're just for a scare factor, while others are willing to flip you over and take a bite. It was only a matter of time where we would come back to Tomb Raider Underworld, because I feel like I have so much resentment towards the ocean in this game, because it really is the one that started this whole thalassophobia thing as far back as I can remember. Lara Croft in the first real opening mission of Tomb Raider Underworld looks over the ocean in what seemingly seems to be a bottomless end, where we must find a temple, solve some puzzles and unlock its mysteries. A mission that asks you one simple question: are you ready to dive in the water? This mission spawned way too many ideas of horror in my thalassophobic mind, and maybe rightly so thanks to the Kraken reveal at the end. But even before you get to those real horrors, you must of course fend off a bunch of attacking sharks. But not bull sharks or great whites, but weirdly a blend of the mako shark with possibly a bull shark, maybe for a fictionalized purpose to have a shark that they can use in any type of water, because as you can imagine, they were particularly proud of the mechanics that they had strongly focused on in periods of this game. Unfortunately, Lara Croft seems to have a history of killing and even punching sharks, which always seems really strange to me with Lara Croft, as she feels like a Valerie Taylor type and would mostly respect the environment and the sharks around her instead of being like, let's go boys, kill some fucking sharks. We actually haven't seen the new Lara Croft face up against sharks, so I'm wondering how Crystal Dynamics are going to handle that within the future, but I would love to see it handled with way more respect, less than an aggressive approach where it seems like all sharks only want to eat Lara. Maybe base it around stealth, or even just the idea of respect, having to avoid their presence and just allowing them to be a part of the world instead of you punching them right in the fucking face. Galleophobia can be used as a tool, and even rightly so, with the way video game developers can compose and use the famous ideas created around sharks to their advantage in the gameplay. But taking a step away from reality with the likes of Subnautica, it kinda gets a pass on this theory, as nothing in its universe and world really mimics what a shark is. Of course there are shark type species, but nothing that really mimics what we know of a shark, and of course it's the art style again which carries its cartoony tone. But of course that doesn't stop the oceans of Subnautica from feeling totally horrifying with the likes of Leviathan Reapers, and of course that thing that lurks within the void once you cross its borders. What I love about Subnautica and its overall message to the ocean is of course it can be terrifying, but it's down to us to respect, look after and even save it where we can. Nothing within its world is real or present or even has any impact on the real horrors of the ocean that many people feel within real life. And Subnautica really does do a lot to go out of its way to make its depths feel real and its inhabitants to feel like natural living animals surviving in their own worlds, without it always ending with a sudden. This also goes to Skyrim, a very big living world with hostile free waters for some reason. They look terrifying at approach, but overall the waters of Skyrim that offer near to no danger outside of drowning. It's peaceful, it's serene. Skyrim showcases the beauty of what the ocean and what water offers to us, and of course all the life and the fish that we're able to catch, save and even understand. Minecraft generally has some of the most beautiful oceans I've ever seen in a video game, with no apparent threat from sharks or any mysterious monster, other than of course the mobs that lurk underneath. But sitting in the ocean, watching it drift by, seeing the aquatic life swim past, seeing the seaweed flow underneath the waves, it's all so beautiful, calming, and I could just sit here and watch it for ages. And as beautiful and sweet as there is, we all still kind of miss the power of the shark. There is a legacy that the shark holds that cannot be understated, and very few games allow you to feel the power of that legacy, the power of the jaws we have been told to fear so much. And no, rolling down a hill as a shark in Edith Finch does not count, as much as I would love it to. Now, I imagine when many people think about playing as the shark, they would jump back to 2006 with, of course, Jaws Unleashed, the main template of games as playing as the shark, a game that actually was just a natural evolution of a 1983 game, Jaws Revenge, a Commodore side-scroller that had you playing, of course, as the iconic shark, speeding through waters, eating swimmers, avoiding boatmen. It's crazy to think even back this early on in gaming's life, people knew that playing and surviving against the shark was only half of the fun, but playing as the shark was where it was at in terms of gameplay. And it wasn't just done once or twice, but instead a shocking 4 times in the Jaws universe where they had you playing as the shark, and one of them being a direct remake of the 1983 Jaws Revenge game. But it was the 2006 Unleashed game which was the most iconic out of the bunch, and at the time, honestly, being there, it was unlike anything else you could play. It was like, say, GTA, but with sharks! You were a big, horrible, smart, terrifyingly strong, ridiculously overpowered shark that had one goal, and that was just to eat people. It was a ton of fun, and its plot was campy and wasn't too deep, and was simplistically genius. In the game, the world is stacked against you. You are painted as a villain and as a monster. Humans would intrude and pollute in sea life, labs would be set up where they kidnap and do experiments on you, and of course there are all manner of human filled locations that were made just for you to rip and tear away at any human flesh. Jaws Unleashed was janky, it was ambitious, and you know what? It was okay for many. Unleashed's legacy had a bigger impact than the game itself, and it was a very fond memory of myself included and all the people who played it, but unfortunately it's also a forgotten gem for those who didn't even know it existed. But it made a template for so many shark games to come, and that's where I really want to focus this segment of the video. There is an abundance of games that actually allow you to play as the shark, but not many of them are as in depth as you may think. And while talking about depth, let's talk about Depth. Depth was an asymmetric multiplayer game which had you either playing as divers or playing as the sharks attacking the divers. It was actually pretty ahead of its time thinking about it now, and I remember when it came out it had quite a big buzz around it, and many YouTubers jumped on board with the hype train of playing as a shark once and for all. It felt like the first true connecting piece of legacy since Jaws Unleashed, and Depth's super fun, creepy and very creative sharks allowed for that idea and vision to be expanded into something greater, and that's how we got to Maneater. Alex Quick, who actually worked on Depth, had this idea to expand it into a single player story where you would focus playing as the shark, starting off as a DLC of course for Depth overall, but expanded into something way bigger than anybody expected, and that turned out to become Maneater. Maneater from day one wore its inspiration on its shoulder and knew exactly what it wanted to reference, and Jaws Unleashed was finally going to be given that huge legacy that it always deserved. Maneater proved to be a real spiritual successor that will blow anything out of the water that had you playing as a shark, and not just into the jaws of a great white, but instead into the jaws of one hell of a bull shark. Maneater gets away from the semi-realism and the weight that Unleashed and even Depth introduced, and has you playing as a super powered bull shark on a personal mission against humanity, and of course to get on top of the food chain. And the important thing to take away from games that allow you to play as sharks, especially the likes of Unleashed and Maneater, is that they're based on over-the-top and cartoony reflections of what people have been told and made to believe about sharks, while also playing into the aggressive fun tropes that an incredible gameplay of a shark could actually offer, with the likes of the tropes that were introduced from films like Jaws. The developers also try and make a case to make it less mean-spirited by giving the sharks a motivation to do what they do, actually in turn vilifying humans from the POV of the shark, allowing the motif for the shark to become way easier to latch onto. So get chomping. And with many of these genres covered, we've dived into the ocean, we've played as the sharks, we've seen what the ocean has to offer and the picture that is painted sharks as monsters. There's one genre that I want to take a step back and relax, admire and protect, and look at these games that allow you to escape from the jaws and look into the heart of what the ocean offers. Welcome back to the world of digital shark bite. Before the break, we took a look at how games painted sharks as nothing more than monsters, but now I'm taking us in a brand new direction, somewhere way less aggressive, and I think I know the perfect place to start. I wasn't really sure what I was going to get into when first playing Abzu. I knew very little of it, but I did know that it was set in the ocean and literally has you swimming against and alongside the giants of the oceans. It sounds like the worst nightmare for anyone who suffers from thalassophobia, but what it does instead is a masterful job of just showing us how beautiful the ocean really is and allowing the player to embrace every beautiful aspect of the ocean. Abzu makes you feel like you're working and swimming alongside all of its wonders, and including a beautiful great white shark, who in Abzu is recognised as possibly the strongest ally your character gains, allowing you to work as a team to stop the machines from causing any harm. It's an incredibly beautiful, frightening and even tense little moment that isn't scary or even leans towards the idea that the great white shark could be terrifying, because it is recognised as a beautiful, caring, loving and powerful creature. And if anything, it's the one ally in the whole game that really makes an impact on how the story is told. There's a beautiful moment at the end when the ocean is free and your character is able to finally go back through and see every single sea creature they've met, including the shark, who is now unfortunately a ghost. But it's so awesome because you get to swim so freely together and you just get to jump around the ocean. It's so fun, it's beautiful, it made me cry a little bit. The shark is just a little cutie, I love him. There is a genre of educational game that's been around for a very long time that shows us the beauty, the wonders, and even gives us a clearer understanding of what the ocean and its creatures have to offer, and they're also very interesting to play. As I said, this isn't a new concept. Some may come to mind like Beyond Blue in 2020, 2007's Endless Ocean 1 and 2, and of course its sister game Ever Blue in 2002, and you can never forget the 1999 classic Dreamcast Seamen. What the fuck is... When I played Beyond Blue just for this footage, I was just blown away by how calming and peaceful it is. Despite the narrative being told around you of your character being a streamer, all I wanted to do was just explore this ocean and see what it had to offer. Explore the whales, explore every type of sea creature here, and see if I can find myself some sharks, which are also here realistically curious and living in their own habitats. I wish games found a way to adopt this educational way of looking at the ocean in other games like GTA. Hell, even Assassin's Creed has an educational history mode, so why not do the opposite with the nature that lives within the world? It worries me a lot that the perspective of sharks hasn't really changed or evolved much since the beginning of gaming and even beyond that. As time goes on, we've become way more educated in how they move, how they live, and how they even act and react with humans, but that doesn't stop the fact that the shark, and even most importantly the great white shark, is always going to be painted as a villain just because of the way it looks. Peter Benchley outwardly said he regrets the misinformation that clearly came from Jaws and what it did to the perception of sharks, the lies that were being told and the reputation that unfortunately was created by that mechanical creature. And it's through that uneducated lens now that the shark has become a household villain and now paying for it with their existence. Education is important here, reputation is important, lies are important. Lies have gotten hundreds and thousands of sharks killed. Lies have made people fear the shark. Lies are the same thing that are getting hundreds killed, and those same lies are the same thing that are affecting trans people all across the world at this moment. This is all what this video was. It is for me to finally say something. This has been on my chest for a while. Over the last 3 years, though it's been going on longer than that, we've seen a disgusting growth in hate crime towards the LGBT+. But it's not just in the US, it's around the world, and it's in the UK where I live too. There has been a growing fear, a growing sense of hate, a growing pile of lies told about trans and drag queens and who's going to be next. In the US alone, there has been hundreds upon hundreds of anti-trans, anti-drag bills, all being pushed just for political red meat, just for the idea of a distraction, and unfortunately trans lives, trans kids, trans youth are paying for it. Lives like myself. I'm trans, and if you've known that, then hey, you've been paying attention, and if you haven't, that's fine. But unfortunately, lives and trans lives are now being put in the crossfire of hate. I needed to really wait for the right time to make this video because I have a lot of mixed feelings and none of them are good. I've unfortunately felt so angry, scared, and fucking sick to my teeth on how the world has all of a sudden become a hateful place. filled with morons. Gross, dangerous lives told about the drag community, told about the trans community. Aggressive, shocking words like grooming are used on a daily basis just to get people worked up, just to get people worried about their kids, not knowing that their kids are the one here in the line of fire. And I was thinking about this subject for the longest time. I didn't know how to talk about sharks in video games, and then all of a sudden this happened, this reality we're unfortunately now living in 2023. I saw the sharks and I saw how they were perceived, I saw the lives, the stereotypes, and how they're mostly always seen as an evil force. Despite science and many years of research, we seem to always turn our head, and we need to do fucking better. I'm worried about the future of my trans rights, I'm worried about the future of my community, and every day I'm reminded of trans lives that were lost just for their skin colour, just for who they wanted to be, just because for a second they wanted to be themselves. And it's those lives who are lost, and it's what we're fighting for which makes us stronger as a community, and that reminds me that we will continue on. But the unfortunate truth is we could never do this alone, and we need allies, we need people who care, people who aren't trans, people who are just there to respect and care for us and allow us to be ourselves. People are willing on their own limb to point out the false lies being told, and for a minute think about the actions and consequences for many minorities who are being attacked for nothing more than just existing. I try not to be defined by being transgender. Hell, I'm so early into my transition, some people may not even know yet, and that doesn't bother me. To fucking hell with my pronouns, to hell with names and dead names. I don't give a fuck what people call me, because I know the people who love me and support me, and I know who and what I am. And in recent months, I've been so seriously depressed, but I've learned one thing about myself within those months. I'm a fighter. I'm willing to not sit by idle while many people's lives get pulled out from under the rug. I'm not willing to sit there, hide and wait and just shrug it off hoping that it will all pass me by, because that's never going to happen. I spent many years of my life growing up lying about who I was just so people wouldn't bully me or find out about my little secret, and I'm not willing to do that again for people who clearly can't take a time to read a book, nor is millions of other trans people out there. So you got another thing coming. Over 19 million years ago, sharks faced a near mass extinction. Every single type of species was nearly wiped off the face of the earth, but the ones that were left fought for their survival. Sharks have been here throughout history and survived. Sharks have been hunted and killed and faced many stages of extinction, but they fought like hell, and we as a community will fight like hell. Trans lives, LGBT rights, drag lives and drag shows aren't up for debate. We wanted to be welcomed, loved, respected, and shown an honest sense of respect from people without asking too many questions. Hell, even IKEA had a fucking shark that was trans, but trans people like sharks clearly aren't getting the respect they deserve, so maybe they should expect a bite back eventually. For we as a community are going to fight for our existence, and we've been here since the start of humanity, and we're gonna fucking be here until the end. How's that for a digital shark bite? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next checkpoints. Goodbye.